Medicine in prehistoric times was deeply intertwined with the beliefs, environment, and survival needs of early humans. While there are no written records from this era, archaeologists and anthropologists have pieced together a remarkable picture of how early societies approached health, disease, and healing. Much of what we know is drawn from cave paintings, burial sites, ancient tools, and the study of present-day indigenous cultures that have preserved ancient traditions. The story of prehistoric medicine is not only about survival, but also about the origins of human creativity, spiritual belief, and the first steps toward modern science. And before we start, please subscribe. Now let's begin. In prehistoric societies, illness was often viewed not just as a physical ailment, but as a sign of spiritual imbalance, punishment from supernatural forces, or the presence of malevolent spirits. Healing, therefore, was both a physical and a spiritual practice. The earliest known healers were often shamans, figures who served as both spiritual leaders and medical practitioners. These individuals were believed to have the ability to communicate with the spirit world and to heal through rituals, chants, dances, and the use of sacred objects. The role of the shaman was vital, as people believed that only by restoring spiritual harmony could physical health be regained. Interestingly, many of the practices used by shamans are echoed in modern holistic and alternative medicine today. Techniques such as energy healing, chanting, drumming, and herbal remedies all find their roots in prehistoric traditions. Shamans often entered trance states to diagnose or treat illness, a practice that anthropologists believe may have involved the use of psychoactive plants or extreme sensory deprivation. These trances were not merely theatrical. They were powerful experiences that united the community in belief and hope for healing. The placebo effect, today recognized in modern medicine, may well have played a role in the perceived success of such treatments. One of the most astonishing discoveries about prehistoric medicine is the practice of trepanation, drilling or scraping a hole into the human skull. Archaeologists have found evidence of trepan skulls dating back as far as 7,000 years. These skulls, found across Europe, South America, Africa, and Asia, often show signs of healing, suggesting that many patients survived the procedure. The reasons for trepanation are still debated. Some scholars believe it was performed to release evil spirits believed to be causing illness or madness. Others think it may have been used to treat head trauma, possibly due to hunting accidents or violent encounters. What is truly remarkable is the precision with which these early surgeries were conducted. Without metal tools or anesthesia, prehistoric people managed to perform complex procedures with surprising success. The survival of patients indicates a knowledge of anatomy, wound care, and possibly even antiseptic treatments, long before the advent of modern medicine. Some researchers speculate that antiseptic substances like honey, tree resins, or certain plants might have been applied to wounds to prevent infection, although direct evidence remains limited. Another critical element of prehistoric medicine was the use of medicinal plants and natural substances. Over generations, early humans developed a keen understanding of their environment, learning through trial and error which plants could heal and which could harm. This knowledge was passed down orally, forming the foundation of many traditional healing systems that persist today. Plants like yarrow, known for its ability to stop bleeding, or willow bark, which contains salicin, the precursor to aspirin, were likely used long before these compounds were isolated and studied in laboratories. Interestingly, burial sites often include remains of plants alongside human skeletons, suggesting that herbs were not only used in life, but also in preparation for the afterlife. In one famous example, the grave of a Neanderthal man in Shanidar Cave, modern-day Iraq, contained traces of several pollen-producing medicinal plants. This finding suggests a rudimentary form of pharmacology and perhaps even empathy, as someone cared enough to tend to the sick or honor the dead with healing herbs. Prehistoric medicine was not limited to human beings. Early humans also observed and imitated the self-healing behaviors of animals. For example, They may have noticed that certain animals chewed specific leaves when sick or wounded. This observational approach to nature contributed significantly to the development of medical knowledge. Today, scientists studying zoopharmacognosy, animal self-medication, find that some modern medicines can trace their origins back to compounds animals naturally seek out in the wild. Another fascinating aspect of prehistoric medicine is its communal nature. Healing was not a solitary activity, but a collective effort that involved the entire community. Illness and recovery were shared experiences, and treatment often took place in the presence of others. Rituals, chants, and offerings involved participation from family members and tribal groups, reinforcing social bonds and shared belief systems. This collective approach may have played a psychological role in healing, offering emotional support and reducing fear or isolation. Artifacts from the prehistoric era, such as bone needles, stone knives, and carved figurines, offer more clues about the complexity of early healing practices. Some figurines depict swollen limbs or exaggerated body parts, leading researchers to speculate that they may have served as visual aids in healing rituals or educational tools for apprentices learning the healing arts. Others believe they functioned as talismans, meant to ward off disease or attract good health. Despite the limited tools and scientific knowledge available to prehistoric humans, their approach to medicine was in many ways sophisticated and adaptive. They relied on careful observation, shared experience, and deep connection with the natural world. Their treatments addressed not only the body but also the mind and spirit, setting the stage for the evolution of more complex medical systems in later civilizations. Modern researchers continue to learn from prehistoric practices. Ethnobotanists and medical historians study indigenous healing traditions to rediscover lost knowledge about plants, healing rituals, and the human body. In some cases, ancient remedies are found to be more effective or safer than their synthetic counterparts. For example, artemisinin, a modern treatment for malaria, was derived from a traditional Chinese herb used for centuries. While prehistoric medicine lacked microscopes, stethoscopes, and surgical suites, it laid the foundation for what would become a long and ongoing journey in human health. These early efforts to understand and treat disease reflect humanity's enduring desire to overcome suffering, improve well-being, and preserve life. From the rhythmic beat of a drum in a shaman's hut to the first careful cut of a stone blade, the roots of medicine run deep into our shared past, reminding us that healing is as ancient as humanity itself. Medicine in ancient civilizations marked a significant leap forward from prehistoric healing practices as societies began to develop structured knowledge systems, written records, and formal roles for healthcare providers. Among these ancient cultures, Egypt stands out as one of the most advanced and well-documented when it comes to early medicine. The ancient Egyptians lived along the fertile banks of the Nile River and built a civilization that thrived for millennia. Their approach to health and medicine combined practical knowledge with religious and spiritual beliefs, resulting in a medical system that was both complex and highly influential. In ancient Egypt, medicine was deeply intertwined with religion. Illness was often believed to be caused by the wrath of the gods or the influence of malevolent spirits. As a result, healing was not only a physical task, but also a spiritual one. The roles of priests and physicians frequently overlapped, especially in the earlier periods of Egyptian history. Temples were central to healing practices, serving as both religious and medical centers. Priests who specialized in healing were known as wab priests and were responsible for maintaining ritual purity, performing prayers, and administering remedies believed to appease the gods. Despite the strong religious component, ancient Egyptian medicine also displayed a surprisingly rational and empirical approach. The Egyptians observed symptoms, classified diseases, and prescribed treatments based on experience and trial. This blend of spiritual belief and practical application made their medical system unique. They believed that the human body was a network of channels that could become blocked, much like the canals of the Nile. Restoring the flow of these bodily channels was key to curing illness, an idea that bears some resemblance to later concepts found in traditional Chinese medicine. One of the most important sources of knowledge about ancient Egyptian medicine comes from medical papyri, ancient scrolls written in hieratic script that document medical practices, remedies, surgical techniques, and diagnoses. Two of the most famous among them are the Ebers Papyrus and the Edwin Smith Papyrus. The Ebers Papyrus, dating back to around 1550 BCE, is one of the oldest and most comprehensive medical documents ever discovered. It contains over 700 remedies and magical formulas, covering a wide array of ailments from digestive issues to skin diseases and mental disorders. The papyrus is remarkable for its extensive pharmacological knowledge, listing ingredients such as honey, resin, opium, and various herbs. It also includes treatments for diseases like asthma, where the patient was instructed to inhale the smoke of certain herbs, a practice not so different from modern inhalation therapies. The Edwin Smith Papyrus, believed to be even older, offers a different perspective. It focuses more on surgical and trauma cases and is considered one of the earliest known texts to apply scientific reasoning to medicine. Unlike the magical tone of the Ebers Papyrus, the Smith Papyrus is clinical, logical, and structured. It contains 48 cases of injuries, primarily to the head and spine, describing the symptoms, diagnosis, treatment, and prognosis in a consistent format. Some of the surgical practices documented in the Smith Papyrus include suturing wounds, setting fractures, and even immobilizing spinal injuries. The level of anatomical knowledge displayed in the document is impressive and suggests that Egyptian physicians had first-hand experience in treating injuries, possibly from war or labor accidents. Interestingly, the Egyptians had a fairly advanced understanding of anatomy and internal organs, largely due to their practice of mummification. While mummification was a religious process aimed at preserving the body for the afterlife, it inadvertently offered priests and embalmers opportunities to study the internal structure of the human body. They knew about organs such as the heart, liver, lungs, and kidneys, although their understanding of their functions was often inaccurate by modern standards. For instance, they believed the heart was the center of thought and emotion, a view shared by other ancient cultures. The brain, curiously, was considered relatively unimportant and was often removed and discarded during mummification. Egyptian doctors were known to specialize in particular areas of medicine, something not common in many ancient cultures. There were physicians dedicated to treating only eyes, teeth, or even internal diseases. This early form of specialization suggests a highly organized medical profession. Records show that some physicians gained considerable reputation and even treated patients in foreign courts, indicating the high esteem in which Egyptian medicine was held. In addition to surgery and pharmacology, Egyptian medicine included preventive care and hygiene. Cleanliness was considered essential not just for health, but also for religious purity. The frequent use of linen bandages, daily bathing, and attention to personal cleanliness helped prevent infections and maintain general well-being. The priests often shaved their heads and bodies and wore white robes, emphasizing both spiritual and physical purity. Medical tools discovered in tombs and archaeological sites, such as forceps, knives, and probes, demonstrate the precision and care with which they practiced their craft. Medical practice in ancient Egypt was often passed down within families, especially in priestly lineages. Training likely took place in temple schools, where students learned not only medicine but also writing, mathematics, and religious rituals. The process of becoming a physician was long and involved mastering both practical treatment and spiritual incantations. A physician had to memorize numerous spells and know how to recite them during treatment, as healing was considered incomplete without divine support. One particularly fascinating aspect of ancient Egyptian medicine is the attention given to mental and emotional health. The Ebers Papyrus contains references to conditions that resemble modern psychological disorders, such as depression and dementia. Treatments for these included both herbal remedies and spiritual counseling, showing a holistic approach that addressed the mind as well as the body. Women in ancient Egypt could also serve as medical practitioners, particularly in the area of gynecology and midwifery. Some medical papyri contain instructions for diagnosing pregnancy, determining the sex of an unborn child, and facilitating childbirth. One method for detecting pregnancy involved watering barley and emmer with a woman's urine and observing which grain sprouted first, an early form of hormonal testing that, surprisingly, has been shown to be about 70% accurate when tested with modern methods. The integration of magic and medicine, which might seem contradictory today, was entirely coherent within the Egyptian worldview. The gods were believed to have created both disease and its cure. Thoth, the god of wisdom, and Sekhmet, the lion-headed goddess of war and healing, were both invoked in medical texts. Incantations often accompanied the application of ointments or the performance of surgical procedures. Amulets and protective charms were used to guard against illness, and certain rituals were performed to cleanse a space before treatment. In summary, ancient Egyptian medicine was an impressive blend of spiritual belief and empirical practice. Their legacy includes some of the earliest known written medical texts, sophisticated surgical techniques, and a deep respect for the human body and its ailments. The physicians of ancient Egypt laid foundational stones upon which later Greek and Roman medicine would build. Their influence extended far beyond their borders, and their knowledge continued to be revered for centuries. Even today, their contributions remind us that medicine is not only a science, but also an art, one that has evolved through the ages but still carries echoes of its ancient roots. Ancient Mesopotamia, often referred to as the cradle of civilization, was home to some of the earliest advances in medicine, law, astronomy, and writing. Situated between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers in what is now modern-day Iraq, Mesopotamian societies, most notably the Sumerians, Akkadians, Babylonians, and Assyrians, developed complex systems of governance, religion, and science that deeply influenced subsequent cultures. Medicine in Mesopotamia was an intricate blend of practical remedies, magical rituals, and a profound belief in the influence of celestial bodies. In this multifaceted context, medical practice not only addressed physical ailments, but also encompassed legal responsibility and cosmic harmony. One of the most remarkable features of Mesopotamian medicine was its formalization under the legal system, most notably seen in the Code of Hammurabi. King Hammurabi, who reigned over Babylon from around 1792 to 1750 BCE, compiled one of the oldest known legal codes in human history. Inscribed on a tall basalt stele, the code consists of over 280 laws that cover all aspects of daily life, including trade, marriage, property rights, and notably, the regulation of medical practice. The inclusion of specific laws governing the actions of physicians reflects the importance of medicine in Mesopotamian society and the need to maintain standards of care and accountability. Hammurabi's code established clear consequences for medical practitioners who failed in their duties. For example, one law stated that if a physician performed surgery with a bronze lancet and the patient died or lost an eye, the doctor's hand would be cut off. Conversely, if the physician succeeded, he would be paid handsomely, sometimes with silver or other forms of wealth depending on the social status of the patient. This legal framework not only emphasized the risks involved in medical procedures, but also underscored the principle of proportional justice, rewards for success, punishment for failure. Interestingly, the severity of the punishment also depended on the patient's rank. Harming a nobleman carried harsher penalties than injuring a slave. These laws, though brutal by modern standards, represent one of the earliest recorded attempts to create a system of medical ethics and professional accountability. The Code of Hammurabi reveals several key aspects of Mesopotamian attitudes toward medicine. First, it confirms the existence of a class of professional physicians who were entrusted with performing surgeries, and administering treatments. These doctors likely underwent some form of training, though no medical schools as we understand them today are known to have existed. Instead, medical knowledge was probably passed down through apprenticeships or within family traditions, often tied to religious institutions. Temples played a central role in both spiritual and medical life, and many physicians may have also served as priests or scribes. Another crucial element of Mesopotamian medicine was its connection to astrology and celestial observation. The Mesopotamians were keen astronomers, and their observations of the night sky laid the foundation for modern astronomy. However, in their worldview, celestial bodies were not just objects of scientific curiosity. They were divine instruments that influenced every aspect of human life, including health. The movement of the planets, the phases of the moon, and the positions of the stars were all believed to have a direct impact on the human body and soul. This belief gave rise to medical astrology, a system in which the diagnosis and treatment of illness were closely tied to astrological readings. Mesopotamian healers often consulted star charts or observed omens in the sky before deciding on a course of treatment. If a particular planet was in a certain constellation, it might indicate that a patient was vulnerable to specific ailments. For example, Mars could be associated with fever or injury, while Saturn might suggest chronic disease or spiritual affliction. Physicians worked in collaboration with astrologers and diviners, blending empirical observations with mystical interpretations to create a comprehensive diagnostic system. The Mesopotamians also developed an elaborate system of omens and prognostications, recorded in cuneiform tablets. These texts, often compiled in temple libraries, contained lists of symptoms along with their interpretations and suggested treatments. One famous example is the diagnostics series Sikiku, which includes hundreds of tablets describing symptoms, prognosis, and rituals. The Mesopotamian approach to medicine involved a dual-track system. One path followed empirical observation and physical remedies, while the other relied on magical incantations and divine intervention. In practice, a Mesopotamian healer, often called an asapu or ASU, would first assess the patient's symptoms, consult astrological charts, or perform divination using liver models or oil patterns, and then decide whether the illness was caused by natural or supernatural forces. If it was believed to be caused by spirits or the gods, magical rituals, amulets, and prayers would be employed. On the other hand, if the condition was thought to be more physical in origin, the healer might prescribe herbal remedies, poultices, or dietary changes. These treatments were remarkably sophisticated for their time. Texts list over 250 plant-based substances, as well as minerals and animal products used in pharmacology. Despite the mystical framework, there is evidence of rational medical thought. Clay tablets describe surgical procedures, bone-setting techniques, and even dental care. The Mesopotamians used bandages, antiseptics like beer or wine, and instruments like knives and tweezers. Certain documents describe symptoms of diseases such as epilepsy, stroke, or infections with surprising accuracy, though the underlying causes were often misattributed to supernatural origins. The high level of organization in medical practice is also evident in the records kept by scribes. These scribes documented cases, treatments, and outcomes, forming an early version of medical records. This written tradition allowed for the transmission of knowledge across generations and played a crucial role in the development of systematic medicine. Many of these texts were preserved in the great libraries of Mesopotamia, such as the one in Nineveh established by King Ashurbanipal in the 7th century BCE. In addition to treating individuals, Mesopotamian medicine also considered the health of the community. Rituals were performed to ward off epidemics or purify the city, especially during times of plague or widespread illness. The connection between cleanliness and health was not fully understood in the modern scientific sense, but public hygiene and spiritual purification were emphasized. Statues of protective deities, like Pazuzu, were placed in homes and hospitals to ward off disease-bearing demons. Interestingly, some Mesopotamian texts show a surprisingly modern understanding of mental health. Conditions like depression or hallucinations were described in terms of possession or spiritual imbalance, but were recognized as significant health issues requiring treatment. Rituals to calm the spirit or remove malevolent influences served a similar psychological purpose to modern therapy, offering reassurance, structure, and the hope of healing. While much of Mesopotamian medicine may seem foreign through the lens of modern science, it represents a vital early step in humanity's quest to understand and combat disease. The integration of law, religion, and science in their medical system highlights the complexity of their society and their earnest attempts to bring order to the mysteries of health and illness. Their careful record-keeping, observations of the stars, and development of legal and ethical standards for doctors laid important groundwork for future civilizations. The legacy of Mesopotamian medicine is both intellectual and symbolic. It shows that even in the earliest epochs of civilization, humans were deeply concerned with health, accountability, and the forces that shape our physical and spiritual well-being. The blend of celestial belief, practical remedies, and legal regulation created a unique medical culture that continued to influence Greek, Roman, and even medieval European medicine. Studying Mesopotamia reminds us that medicine has never been just a science. It has always been a reflection of how societies understand the body, the soul, and the universe itself. Ancient India made profound and enduring contributions to the field of medicine, with a focus not only on treating disease, but on promoting balance, wellness, and longevity. Among its most significant legacies is the system of Ayurveda, a comprehensive and deeply philosophical approach to health that continues to influence medical practice across the world today. Unlike many other early medical systems that separated the body and the spirit or treated symptoms in isolation, Indian medicine from the earliest periods emphasized a holistic vision of human health that included the body, mind, and soul, all governed by the rhythms of nature and universal laws. The word Ayurveda is derived from two Sanskrit terms, Ayus, meaning life, and Veda, meaning knowledge or science. Literally translated as the science of life. Ayurveda developed more than 3,000 years ago, though its roots may extend even further back into the Indus Valley Civilization, which flourished around 2500 BCE. The system was codified in ancient texts such as the Charaka Samhita and the Sushruta Samhita. These volumes are not merely collections of remedies or procedures. They are extensive treatises that include anatomy, physiology, pathology, diagnosis, ethics, and guidance for daily living. Ayurveda is based on the concept of balance among three fundamental energies or dashas, Vata, Pitta, and Kapha. Each dasha governs specific physiological and psychological functions and is influenced by factors such as diet, climate, lifestyle, and emotional state. Illness arises when there is an imbalance among the dashas. Treatment, therefore, is not only about curing a disease but restoring harmony within the individual and between the individual and their environment. This understanding led Ayurvedic practitioners to prioritize prevention and promote dietary regulation, sleep hygiene, exercise, meditation, and seasonal detoxification. One particularly striking aspect of Ayurveda is its personalized nature. Each individual is seen as having a unique constitution or prakriti, a natural balance of the three dashas. Treatments are tailored according to this constitution, meaning two people with the same symptoms might receive entirely different therapies. This personalized approach, which modern medicine has only recently begun to explore through genomics and precision medicine, was a cornerstone of Ayurvedic theory millennia ago. The pharmacopoeia of Ayurveda is immense, including thousands of plant-based substances, along with minerals and animal products. Herbs such as ashwagandha, turmeric, neem, and tulsi were commonly used, many of which are still widely recognized for their health benefits today. The preparation of medicines involved detailed protocols, often involving purification, drying, grinding, and combining substances in specific ratios. There was an emphasis on using the correct medium, like ghee, honey, or water, to ensure the effective delivery of the medicine. Perhaps the most astonishing contributions of ancient Indian medicine come from the realm of surgery, and the name most closely associated with this achievement is Sushruta. Often called the father of surgery, Sushruta is credited with writing the Sushruta Samhita, an encyclopedic Sanskrit text composed sometime around 600 BCE, though some scholars suggest its oral tradition may go back even further. This text is one of the earliest known surgical manuals and contains detailed descriptions of more than 300 surgical procedures, over 120 surgical instruments, and numerous classifications of injuries and diseases. The range of surgeries described in the Sushruta Samhita is remarkable. It includes procedures such as cataract extraction, removal of bladder stones, cesarean sections, dental surgeries, and the setting of fractures and dislocations. Sushruta's understanding of anatomy was advanced for his time. He advocated for the study of human dissection, using the bodies of deceased individuals to understand organ placement and tissue structure. While this practice was controversial and likely rare due to religious customs, it underscores the scientific mindset that was present in ancient Indian medical circles. One of the most famous procedures associated with Sushruta is rhinoplasty, or nose reconstruction. This was especially important in ancient India, where the punishment for certain crimes involved the amputation of the nose. Sushruta described a technique in which a flap of skin from the forehead was used to reconstruct the nose, a method known today as the Indian flap and still used in plastic surgery. His writings also stress the importance of cleanliness, the sterilization of surgical tools, and post-operative care, including dietary guidelines and the use of antiseptic herbal pastes, which likely reduced the risk of infection long before the advent of modern germ theory. Medical ethics were a crucial component of Sushruta's teachings. He emphasized compassion, humility, and the physician's moral duty to prioritize the patient's well-being. Physicians were expected to be calm, clean, intelligent, and devoted to learning. The teacher-student relationship was sacred, and students were expected to practice strict discipline. Instruction involved not just theoretical knowledge, but hands-on experience using models made of fruits, vegetables, or animal parts to simulate surgical practice. The training was long and rigorous, reflecting the high regard for medical professionalism in ancient Indian society. Mental and spiritual health were not secondary concerns in Ayurveda, but deeply embedded within its framework. Emotions like fear, anger, grief, and jealousy were recognized as potent contributors to physical disease. The role of the mind, called manas, was seen as central in the manifestation of illness and healing. Practices like yoga, breathing exercises, pranayama, and meditation were prescribed to maintain mental clarity and emotional balance. Ayurveda saw health as a state of dynamic balance, not only within the body's systems, but also in one's relationships, work, and spiritual life. Ayurvedic texts also include insights into epidemiology, toxicology, and even the management of public health during epidemics. The Charaka Samhita discusses seasonal diseases, contagion, and environmental influences on health. There are descriptions of quarantine practices, sanitation, and the purification of air and water. Temples and public baths were designed with hygiene in mind, and rituals often included cleansing not just for spiritual reasons, but for physical health as well. Nutrition played a central role in Ayurveda, with food considered both sustenance and medicine. The texts contain elaborate dietary guidelines tailored to individual constitutions, health conditions, and seasonal changes. Spices like cumin, coriander, fennel, ginger, and black pepper were valued not only for flavor, but for their digestive and therapeutic properties. Fasting and detoxification therapies, such as panchakarma, were recommended to eliminate toxins and restore dashic balance. This emphasis on diet as a preventive and healing tool is echoed in modern nutrition science and holistic health practices. Women's health received special attention in ancient Indian medicine. There were specific treatments and guidelines for menstruation, fertility, pregnancy, and childbirth. Midwives played an essential role in society, and Ayurvedic texts offered comprehensive prenatal and postnatal care advice, including diet, rest, herbal treatments, and emotional support. The integration of the mother's mental and physical well-being into the health of the unborn child shows a sophisticated understanding of the intergenerational impact of healthcare. Ayurveda's influence extended beyond the Indian subcontinent. Through trade and cultural exchange, Ayurvedic knowledge reached China, the Middle East, and later, Europe. The interactions between Indian and Greco-Arabic medical traditions during the medieval period were significant. Many of the medicinal plants and treatment principles of Ayurveda found their way into Unani medicine and eventually into Western pharmacopoeias. Despite being thousands of years old, the Ayurvedic system remains highly relevant today. Its emphasis on individualized care, mind-body integration, preventive medicine, and the therapeutic value of nature aligns with modern movements in integrative and functional medicine. In recent years, there has been a resurgence of interest in Ayurvedic herbs, dietary practices, and wellness routines, not only in India, but around the globe. The ancient Indian medical tradition, particularly through Ayurveda and the contributions of physicians like Sushruta, demonstrates that early societies possessed not only empirical knowledge, but also philosophical depth and ethical insight in their approach to healing. Their holistic vision, emphasis on balance, and integration of body, mind, and spirit laid the groundwork for a model of healthcare that continues to inspire and inform practitioners and patients alike. Through the preserved wisdom of its texts and the enduring impact of its principles, ancient India's medical heritage remains a testament to human ingenuity and the timeless pursuit of health and harmony. Ancient Chinese medicine is one of the most enduring and philosophically rich systems of healthcare in the world, with its roots stretching back more than 2,000 years. Unlike many ancient medical traditions that focused primarily on treating symptoms or applying isolated cures, Chinese medicine developed from a worldview that saw the body, nature, and the cosmos as interconnected and governed by universal laws. At the heart of traditional Chinese medicine, or TCM, lies the belief that health is the result of harmony within the body and between the body and its environment. This intricate system of healing incorporates a wide range of practices, including acupuncture, herbal medicine, dietary therapy, massage, exercise, and philosophical teachings, all aimed at maintaining or restoring balance and vitality. One of the foundational concepts of TCM is qi, often translated as vital energy or life force. Qi flows through the body along pathways known as meridians, and its proper flow is essential to good health. When qi is blocked, deficient, or excessive, disease arises. The concept of qi is deeply tied to the dual principles of yin and yang, which represent opposite but complementary forces found in nature and the body. Yin is associated with qualities such as cold, rest, and substance, while yang is linked to heat, activity, and energy. Good health is achieved when yin and yang are in balance, allowing qi to flow smoothly and nourish the organs and tissues. The earliest known texts on Chinese medicine include the Huangdi Neijing, or the Yellow Emperor's Inner Canon, written sometime between the 3rd and 1st centuries BCE. This text is presented as a dialogue between the mythical Yellow Emperor and his minister and covers anatomy, diagnosis, pathology, acupuncture, herbal therapy, and medical ethics. What is remarkable about this work is its philosophical tone. It does not merely describe how to treat disease, but seeks to understand the nature of life and the principles governing health. It emphasizes preventive care, moderation in all things, and alignment with the natural world. Seasonal changes, emotional states, dietary habits, and spiritual discipline are all considered essential factors in maintaining health. Acupuncture, one of the most famous elements of TCM, is based on the idea of manipulating the flow of qi through the meridians. Practitioners insert very thin needles into specific points along these pathways to unblock or redirect energy, thereby restoring balance and promoting healing. Each acupuncture point is associated with a particular organ system or physiological function. For example, a point on the hand might be used to treat headaches, while a point on the leg might relieve digestive issues. Although the mechanisms of acupuncture are still being studied in modern science, clinical evidence suggests that it can be effective for a variety of conditions, including chronic pain, stress, insomnia, and nausea. Herbal medicine is another cornerstone of TCM and involves the use of plant, mineral, and sometimes animal substances to balance the body and treat illness. Ancient Chinese herbalists developed an extensive materia medica, cataloging thousands of substances with detailed information on their properties, effects, and combinations. Herbs were rarely used in isolation. Instead, they were blended into complex formulas tailored to the patient's unique constitution and symptoms. Ingredients like ginseng, ginger, licorice root, goji berries, and reishi mushrooms are just a few examples of herbs that were used for boosting energy, calming the spirit, enhancing immunity, and regulating bodily functions. Interestingly, some of these herbs have been validated by modern pharmacological research for their anti-inflammatory, antioxidant, and immune-modulating properties. Diagnosis in traditional Chinese medicine is a subtle and sophisticated art. Practitioners do not rely solely on physical symptoms. They examine the patient's pulse, tongue, complexion, voice, and even emotional state to determine imbalances. The tongue, in particular, is seen as a map of the internal organs, and its color, shape, and coating can reveal deep insights into a person's health. Pulse diagnosis is equally intricate, involving the assessment of the strength, rhythm, and quality of the pulse at several locations on the wrist. Rather than identifying disease by Western categories like diabetes or arthritis, TCM uses syndromes, patterns of disharmony such as liver qi stagnation or spleen qi deficiency, which guide the treatment strategy. The five elements theory, another key concept in TCM, categorizes all phenomena, including the organs and bodily systems, into five interrelated types: wood, fire, earth, metal, and water. Each element corresponds to a season, emotion, direction, color, and organ. For example, the liver is associated with wood, springtime, the emotion of anger, and the color green. The five elements are used to understand relationships and cycles in the body, both in health and disease. When one element becomes excessive or deficient, it disrupts the entire system, and treatment is aimed at restoring the balance among them. TCM does not overlook the importance of lifestyle in maintaining health. Dietary therapy is tailored not just to nutritional content, but to the energetic qualities of foods, whether they are warming or cooling, moistening or drying, tonifying or dispersing. Emotional regulation is considered equally crucial. Unresolved anger, grief, worry, or fear can disturb the organs and lead to physical disease. Chinese medicine holds that emotions are both the cause and the result of bodily imbalance. Practices like Qigong and Tai Chi, slow, meditative exercises combining movement, breath control, and intention, are prescribed to harmonize qi, strengthen the body, and calm the mind. In ancient China, medical practice was often integrated with religious and philosophical systems such as Taoism, Confucianism, and Buddhism. Taoist influence is particularly strong in the emphasis on harmony with nature and the cultivation of longevity. Ancient texts are filled with guidance on how to live a life of balance, avoid excess, and maintain internal harmony through simplicity, compassion, and non-attachment. Confucian ideals brought a strong ethical dimension to medicine, emphasizing the role of the physician as a moral and selfless servant of the people. The combination of spiritual insight and medical practice elevated the role of the healer to one of great respect and responsibility in society. Hospitals and organized medical institutions began to appear during the Tang Dynasty, 618 to 907 CE, and the government began to formalize medical education and examinations. The establishment of medical schools and the compilation of standardized texts ensured the transmission of medical knowledge across generations. This era also saw the publication of the Benqiao Gongmu, or Compendium of Materia Medica, by Li Shizhen in the 16th century, one of the most comprehensive medical texts in Chinese history. It cataloged over 1,800 substances and was the product of decades of study, observation, and practice. Interestingly, forensic medicine also has deep roots in ancient China. The Washing Away of Wrongs, written in the 13th century by Song Ci, is considered the world's first systematic book on forensic pathology. It included guidelines for examining corpses, identifying causes of death, and even conducting autopsies. This reflects the wide scope and scientific curiosity that characterized Chinese medicine. The enduring legacy of traditional Chinese medicine lies in its holistic approach and its philosophical depth. Even as modern biomedicine has advanced with incredible speed, TCM continues to be practiced around the world, often in conjunction with Western medical techniques. Its focus on prevention, personalization, and the integration of mind and body speaks to concerns that are increasingly relevant in today's healthcare environment. What makes ancient Chinese medicine truly fascinating is not only its technical sophistication, but the worldview that underpins it. It does not see the body as a machine to be fixed, but as a living ecosystem that reflects the rhythms of nature and the emotions of the heart. The emphasis on harmony, balance, and interconnectedness offers a powerful reminder that health is not just the absence of disease, but a dynamic state of equilibrium between all aspects of life. Through its enduring principles and evolving practices, traditional Chinese medicine remains one of humanity's greatest contributions to the art and science of healing. Ancient Greece holds a foundational place in the history of medicine, not only because it contributed new methods and ideas, but because it marked a decisive shift away from supernatural explanations of illness toward rational, observational, and systematic approaches. This transition is largely credited to the influence of Hippocrates, often referred to as the father of medicine. Greek medical thinkers of the classical era sought to understand disease through the lens of nature, logic, and philosophy, laying the groundwork for clinical practice, ethical standards, and physiological theory that would shape Western medicine for centuries. Before the advent of rational medicine, the Greeks, like many other ancient peoples, attributed disease to divine punishment or the influence of supernatural forces. The god Asclepius, associated with healing and medicine, was widely worshipped, and sanctuaries known as Asclepia served both as temples and healing centers. Pilgrims seeking cures would engage in ritual purification, sacrifices, and a process called incubation, where they would sleep in a sacred space in hopes of receiving healing visions or dreams. Although these practices contained spiritual elements, the Asclepia also became centers where empirical healing methods such as diet, exercise, massage, and the use of herbs were employed, indicating that even the religious model of healing in Greece involved a growing attention to bodily care and observation. The turning point came with Hippocrates of Kos, who lived during the 5th century BCE. He and his followers began to reject the idea that disease was caused by gods or curses. Instead, they proposed that illness had natural causes and that these could be understood, predicted, and treated through careful study. The body, in this new view, was a system governed by universal laws of nature, and health depended on maintaining balance within this system. This perspective marked the birth of rational medicine and inaugurated a tradition of empirical inquiry that would influence physicians for millennia. The writings attributed to Hippocrates, though likely compiled by multiple authors from his school, form a vast body of medical texts known as the Hippocratic Corpus. These works cover a wide range of topics including diagnosis, prognosis, epidemics, surgery, and gynecology. One of their most striking features is the systematic approach to observation. Physicians were instructed to closely monitor patients' symptoms, habits, environment, and progression of illness. This careful attention to individual cases laid the foundation for clinical medicine. For the first time, doctors began to record case histories and observe patterns in disease development, allowing for the growth of medical knowledge based on experience rather than tradition or myth. One of the most enduring concepts from the Hippocratic tradition is the theory of the four humors. According to this theory, the human body was composed of four basic fluids: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Each humor was associated with particular qualities: hot, cold, wet, or dry, and linked to the four elements of nature: air, water, fire, and earth. Health was seen as a state of equilibrium among these humors. Disease resulted from an imbalance, whether due to diet, climate, lifestyle, or internal dysfunction. Treatment aimed to restore balance through diet, purging, bloodletting, and other methods designed to eliminate excesses or correct deficiencies. Although the theory of the humors would later be refined and expanded by Roman and medieval physicians, it originated in the Greek tradition and provided a framework for understanding both physical and mental health. For example, an excess of blood was believed to produce a sanguine temperament, cheerful and sociable, while too much black bile led to melancholy. This integration of physical states with psychological dispositions shows how ancient Greek medicine tried to address the whole person, not just isolated symptoms. While modern science has abandoned the literal framework of the humors, the underlying idea that health involves systemic balance continues to influence holistic and integrative medicine today. The Hippocratic school emphasized ethical behavior and the responsibilities of the physician, as most famously articulated in the Hippocratic Oath. This oath required doctors to treat patients to the best of their ability, avoid harm, respect confidentiality, and pass on medical knowledge to future generations. Although modern versions of the oath have been revised, the core principles remain a cornerstone of medical ethics. It's remarkable that over 2,000 years ago, Greek physicians were already grappling with issues that remain central to healthcare today: professional integrity, respect for the patient, and the limitations of medical knowledge. Interestingly, Greek medicine was not isolated from other branches of knowledge but deeply intertwined with philosophy. Thinkers such as Plato and Aristotle contributed to discussions about anatomy, physiology, and the soul. Aristotle, in particular, wrote extensively on biology and comparative anatomy, conducting dissections on animals to study organ function. He believed in a teleological approach to the body. Every part had a purpose, and understanding that purpose was key to understanding health. Although his anatomical theories were not always accurate, his method of empirical observation and logical deduction became a model for scientific inquiry. Greek physicians also paid attention to environmental factors in health, anticipating what we now call social determinants of health. The Hippocratic text on airs, waters, and places argued that geography, climate, diet, and lifestyle could influence the prevalence and nature of disease. This work recommended that physicians consider the location of towns, prevailing winds, and local customs when diagnosing and treating patients. Such insights foreshadowed the fields of epidemiology and public health, underscoring the Greek commitment to a broad, contextual understanding of disease. While surgical techniques were limited due to the absence of anesthesia and antiseptics, Greek physicians performed a variety of procedures, including setting broken bones, lancing abscesses, and trepanation. The tools they used, scalpels, forceps, probes, were remarkably sophisticated and often crafted with great precision. Greek medical texts emphasized the importance of anatomical knowledge, although dissection of human bodies was rare due to cultural taboos. Despite these limitations, physicians developed surprisingly accurate descriptions of organs and systems, especially in the later Hellenistic period when anatomy was more openly studied in centers like Alexandria. Alexandria, in Egypt, became a vital hub for medical learning during the Ptolemaic period. Greek physicians such as Herophilus and Erasistratos conducted human dissections and made significant discoveries in neuroanatomy, circulation, and organ function. Herophilus distinguished between sensory and motor nerves and studied the brain in detail, while Erasistratos described the heart's function and theorized about blood movement. Although their insights were eventually overshadowed by Galen in Roman times, their work represents the high point of Greek anatomical science. Greek medicine also demonstrated a humanistic side that recognized the role of emotions, social support, and the doctor-patient relationship in healing. Physicians were advised to treat patients with kindness, to build trust, and to adapt their approach based on the temperament and needs of the individual. This holistic view of medicine as both a science and an art was central to the Hippocratic ideal. A good doctor was not just a technician but a thoughtful observer, a skilled communicator, and a moral agent. The influence of ancient Greek medicine extended far beyond the boundaries of the Greek world. Through the conquests of Alexander the Great and later the expansion of the Roman Empire, Greek medical texts and ideas spread across Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East. In the Islamic Golden Age, scholars translated Greek medical works into Arabic, preserving and expanding upon them. These texts eventually returned to Europe during the Renaissance, helping to spark a renewed interest in empirical science and laying the foundation for modern medicine. What makes ancient Greek medicine particularly compelling is its commitment to understanding health as a natural and knowable process. By shifting the focus from divine intervention to human observation and reason, Greek physicians created a model of inquiry that continues to inspire science and medicine today. The theory of the four humors, though scientifically obsolete, embodied a holistic vision of the human body as a dynamic system in constant interaction with its environment. Hippocrates' emphasis on ethics, observation, and patient care remains relevant in a world that continues to grapple with the complexities of health and healing. In many ways, ancient Greek medicine reminds us that progress in medicine is not only about technology or knowledge, but about perspective. The willingness to question tradition, observe carefully, think logically, and act compassionately. These are the legacies of ancient Greece that still shape how we understand and practice medicine in the modern world. Ancient Rome made significant contributions to the development of medicine, not only through the efforts of individual physicians such as Galen, but also through its extraordinary achievements in public health and sanitation. Roman medicine was a fusion of earlier Greek ideas, especially those of Hippocrates, and practical innovations suited to a vast and diverse empire. The Romans saw medicine not only as a matter of individual treatment, but as a crucial element of public life, closely tied to their engineering genius and administrative efficiency. This dual focus on the scientific understanding of the human body and the collective health of society helped to create a medical culture that would profoundly influence Western civilization for centuries. Perhaps no figure looms larger in Roman medical history than Galen, a Greek physician born in Pergamon in 129 CE. Galen's influence on anatomy, physiology, and medical theory would endure for well over a millennium, shaping the way medicine was taught and practiced across the Roman Empire and later throughout the Islamic and European worlds. Galen began his career treating gladiators, which provided him with unique opportunities to study traumatic injuries and conduct surgical procedures. His keen observations and experimental methods set him apart from many of his contemporaries. Galen believed that anatomy was the key to understanding how the body functioned. Since human dissection was largely prohibited, he turned to animal dissection, primarily monkeys, pigs, and dogs, to make inferences about human anatomy. Although this led to some inaccuracies, such as his belief that the human jaw was made of two bones instead of one, many of his conclusions were surprisingly accurate given the limitations of his time. He described the functions of the kidneys, liver, heart, and nervous system in detail, and he was among the first to propose that the brain, not the heart, controlled the body. He also demonstrated that arteries carry blood, not air as many earlier physicians believed, a crucial insight that laid the groundwork for later discoveries in circulation. Galen's writings were extensive, totaling hundreds of treatises covering anatomy, physiology, pathology, pharmacology, and philosophy. His approach was both empirical and theoretical. He performed experiments to understand bodily functions. For example, tying off the ureters in animals to prove that urine came from the kidneys, not the bladder. But he also incorporated the Greek concept of the four humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile, believing that health depended on maintaining a balance among these fluids. His humoral theories, along with his anatomical teachings, became dogma in medieval European medical schools and were not seriously challenged until the Renaissance. While Galen focused on the workings of the body, Roman society as a whole was deeply invested in public health. The Romans understood that the health of individuals was closely tied to the cleanliness and structure of their environment. This awareness led to one of their greatest achievements: the development of a sophisticated sanitation and water management system that remains impressive even by modern standards. Roman engineers constructed an extensive network of aqueducts to transport fresh water from distant sources into cities and towns. These aqueducts, some of which spanned dozens of miles, supplied water for drinking, bathing, irrigation, and even decorative fountains. Public baths, or thermae, were a central feature of Roman urban life and served not just as places for hygiene, but also as social and cultural centers. These complexes included hot and cold pools, steam rooms, exercise areas, and libraries. Romans of all social classes frequented the baths, reinforcing the idea that public health was a communal responsibility. The constant flow of fresh water helped to prevent the stagnation that could lead to disease, and the widespread availability of bathing facilities contributed to a relatively high standard of cleanliness. The Romans also developed complex sewer systems to remove waste from populated areas. The Cloaca Maxima, one of the world's earliest sewage systems, was constructed in Rome in the 6th century BCE and continued to function for centuries. It drained wastewater from homes, streets, and public latrines into the Tiber River, reducing the risk of contamination and illness. Latrines were often communal and featured running water beneath the seats to carry waste away, a remarkably hygienic practice for the time. These systems were so well built that portions of them are still intact today. In addition to water and waste management, Roman cities were laid out with public health in mind. Streets were designed for easy drainage, and many cities had laws requiring the removal of trash and dead animals. Burial of the dead was regulated to prevent disease, with cemeteries placed outside city limits. Military camps, in particular, were planned with meticulous care, including well-spaced tents, latrines located downstream from water sources, and routine medical inspections, all of which helped to reduce outbreaks of illness among soldiers. Roman medicine also benefited from the empire's vast reach, which allowed for the exchange of medical knowledge, herbs, and techniques across cultures. From Egypt, Rome inherited medical papyri and anatomical knowledge. From Greece, it absorbed philosophical and clinical traditions. From Asia, new drugs and therapies were introduced. Roman military doctors, or medici, often traveled with legions, adapting their practices to local conditions and learning from the peoples they encountered. This cosmopolitan medical culture helped create a more comprehensive and flexible approach to healing. Although much of Roman medicine was grounded in Greek theory, it had a strong practical side. Roman doctors, especially in the military, were skilled surgeons capable of performing amputations, trepanation, wound care, and treatment of fractures. Surgical tools found in archaeological sites, scalpels, forceps, bone drills, and specula, indicate a high degree of technical sophistication. Medical texts from authors like Celsus provided detailed instructions on procedures such as cataract removal and hernia repair. Roman physicians emphasized cleanliness in surgery, often boiling instruments before use. a surprisingly advanced practice for the time. Medicine in ancient Rome was not confined to elite scholars. Healers of various backgrounds, including midwives, herbalists, and folk practitioners, played essential roles in everyday healthcare. Women were particularly important in areas like childbirth and gynecology. The Roman physician Cyrenus of Ephesus wrote extensively on obstetrics and pediatrics, offering advice that remained influential for centuries. His treatise, Gynecology, described everything from prenatal care to infant feeding, and he advocated for gentle delivery methods and clean birthing environments. Roman attitudes toward mental health also reveal a degree of compassion and understanding. While some mental illnesses were still seen through a supernatural lens, writers like Galen believed that psychological disturbances had physical causes and could be treated with diet, exercise, music, and conversation. Roman philosophy, particularly Stoicism, emphasized emotional resilience and the power of rational thought, ideas that influence therapeutic approaches to mental well-being. Despite its many advances, Roman medicine was not without limitations. Anatomical errors persisted due to the ban on human dissection, and treatments based on humoral theory were often misguided. Bloodletting and purging, though common, could do more harm than good. Moreover, access to quality medical care varied widely depending on one's social status. While wealthy citizens could afford private physicians and treatments, the poor often relied on home remedies or the goodwill of charitable healers. Still, the legacy of Roman medicine is enduring. Galen's works were translated into Arabic and Latin and studied for over 1,000 years, shaping the curricula of medieval and Renaissance medical schools. Roman public health measures, clean water, sanitation, urban planning, remain foundational principles of modern public health. The idea that medicine must serve both the individual and the community is as relevant today as it was in ancient Rome. The story of medicine in ancient Rome is not simply a tale of doctors and diseases. It is a story of civilization grappling with the challenge of health in all its dimensions: personal, environmental, and ethical. It reminds us that medicine is more than a technical skill. It is a social institution, a body of knowledge, and a reflection of cultural values. The Romans, with their blend of practicality and theory, science and infrastructure, left a legacy that continues to inform how we think about health, healing, and human flourishing. The Middle Ages, stretching roughly from the 5th to the 15th century, marked a complex and multifaceted period in the history of medicine. Contrary to the popular image of these centuries as a time of darkness and ignorance, medical knowledge and practices not only survived but in many ways advanced, though unevenly, across different regions of Europe, the Middle East, and North Africa. Christian monasticism, Islamic scholarship, devastating pandemics, and the rise of formal education all played key roles in shaping medieval medicine. In Christian Europe, much of the medical knowledge from antiquity was preserved in the scriptoriums of monasteries. After the collapse of the Western Roman Empire, literacy and learning became increasingly concentrated within the church, particularly among monks. Monasteries served not only as spiritual centers, but also as places where ancient texts, including medical treatises by Hippocrates, Galen, and other Greek and Roman authors, were copied and studied. Monastic medicine was deeply influenced by religious beliefs, and illness was often seen as a test from God or a punishment for sin. Healing was thus both a physical and spiritual endeavor. Monks and nuns cared for the sick within the walls of infirmaries, relying on a mix of prayer, ritual, herbal remedies, and the limited medical texts they had access to. Monastic gardens often included a wide variety of medicinal herbs, and monks became skilled in the preparation of herbal remedies. Texts such as the Herbarium of Apuleius and the later Physica by Hildegard of Bingen detailed the uses of plants like sage, rosemary, yarrow, and comfrey. Hildegard, a 12th century abbess and polymath, combined theology with natural philosophy and medicine. She viewed health as a balance not only of humors but also of moral and cosmic forces. and her works reveal a deep understanding of diet, the senses, and the psychological dimensions of illness. Her medical writings were among the most widely read in medieval Europe and show how monastic medicine could bridge faith and empirical observation. While Europe was preserving fragments of classical medical knowledge, the Islamic world was expanding upon it. After the 7th century, Muslim scholars translated hundreds of Greek and Roman texts into Arabic, particularly in centers of learning such as Baghdad, Cordoba, and Cairo. These translations were not mere copies. They were accompanied by commentary, critique, and significant additions. Among the most famous contributors to medieval Islamic medicine were Avicenna and Rhazes. Avicenna, known in the Islamic world as Ibn Sina, was a Persian polymath whose most influential medical work, the Canon of Medicine, became a cornerstone of both Islamic and European medical education for centuries. This encyclopedic text synthesized Galenic, Hippocratic, and Indian medical traditions, introducing ideas such as contagious diseases, quarantine, and the importance of systematic experimentation. Avicenna emphasized the role of diagnosis and prognosis, and he meticulously described over 700 drugs, their effects, and proper dosages. His approach to medicine was holistic, combining physical science, ethics, and philosophy. The Canon was so influential that it remained a standard medical text in Europe until the 17th century. Rhazes, or al-Razi, another towering figure in Islamic medicine, wrote extensively on clinical practice, pediatrics, and pharmacology. One of his most famous works, Al-Hawi, the comprehensive book on medicine, compiled a vast amount of medical knowledge from various sources and included his own observations. He is credited with distinguishing smallpox from measles and with advocating for evidence-based medicine. Rhazes emphasized the importance of the physician's bedside manner, stating that a doctor should not only cure, but also comfort and encourage the patient. Islamic hospitals, or bimaristans, were advanced for their time and served as both treatment centers and medical schools. Located in cities such as Baghdad and Damascus, these institutions offered care to all patients regardless of background, with separate wards for different illnesses. They were equipped with pharmacies, libraries, and lecture halls, allowing for the integration of theory and practice. Medical students studied under experienced physicians, and their education included rigorous training in both diagnosis and treatment. Meanwhile, in Europe, the 14th century brought one of the most devastating health crises in human history, the Black Death. This outbreak of bubonic plague, caused by the bacterium Yersinia pestis and transmitted by fleas on rats, arrived in Europe in 1347 and rapidly spread across the continent, killing an estimated 1/3 to 1/2 of the population. The plague caused enormous social, economic, and religious upheaval and exposed the limitations of contemporary medical knowledge. Physicians at the time had little understanding of the disease's cause, often blaming it on miasma, bad air, or divine punishment. Common treatments included bloodletting, purging, and the application of poultices, none of which were effective. Plague doctors, often depicted in beaked masks filled with aromatic herbs, attempted to protect themselves from infection with these early forms of personal protective equipment. Some towns resorted to quarantine, a practice that emerged in the Italian port city of Ragusa, modern Dubrovnik, where ships were isolated for 40 days, a quarantina, before passengers could disembark. Though primitive, this measure showed an early understanding of the value of isolation in preventing the spread of disease. The emotional and spiritual toll of the plague was profound. Flagellant movements arose in which people publicly whipped themselves in an attempt to atone for humanity's sins. Others turned to scapegoating, blaming marginalized groups like Jews, leading to horrific acts of violence and persecution. Yet the pandemic also prompted deeper questions about health, mortality, and the role of medicine. In the long term, it led to changes in public health policy, urban sanitation, and a growing skepticism toward older medical authorities. In the midst of these transformations, the later Middle Ages witnessed the rise of medical universities, and the formalization of medical education. Beginning in the 12th and 13th centuries, schools such as those in Salerno, Bologna, Montpellier, and Paris began to offer structured training in medicine. The University of Salerno, often called the first true medical school in medieval Europe, was known for its inclusive approach, welcoming Christian, Jewish, and Muslim scholars. Its curriculum drew heavily on translated Arabic texts, especially the works of Avicenna and Galen, and emphasized both theory and practice. At these universities, students studied a liberal arts curriculum before entering medical training, which included courses in logic, natural philosophy, anatomy, and pathology. Lectures were often delivered by reading aloud from authoritative texts, with little dissection or clinical practice due to cultural and religious constraints. However, some anatomical studies were performed, often using the bodies of executed criminals. These dissections, while rare, began to challenge long-standing anatomical beliefs, setting the stage for the later breakthroughs of the Renaissance. Degrees in medicine were awarded only after several years of study and the successful completion of examinations. Physicians were increasingly distinguished from surgeons and barber surgeons, whose work was considered more manual and less prestigious. This separation reflected broader social hierarchies and contributed to the professionalization of medical practice. However, practical healing was still largely in the hands of local healers, midwives, and apothecaries who provided accessible care to the majority of the population. Interestingly, some medical texts began to be written in vernacular languages instead of Latin, making knowledge more widely available. Manuals like the Leech Book of Bald, an Old English medical text from the 9th century, or the French Rosa Anglica by John of Gadsden, combined folk remedies with scholarly medicine and were used by laypeople and practitioners alike. These texts reveal a diverse medical landscape in which empirical knowledge, religious belief, and classical theory all coexisted. The medieval period also saw early attempts at public health regulation. Some cities established boards of health, required the inspection of food and water supplies, and enacted laws to prevent the spread of disease. These efforts were often limited in scope, but they marked the beginning of a civic approach to medicine that would grow in importance during the Renaissance and beyond. Medicine in the Middle Ages was thus far from stagnant. It was a period of preservation, transmission, synthesis, and, in some cases, innovation. From the quiet herb gardens of monasteries to the bustling hospitals of Baghdad, from the terror of the Black Death to the structured halls of the first medical universities, this era laid essential foundations for the medical revolutions that would follow. It demonstrated that medicine was not only a scientific endeavor, but also a deeply human one, shaped by faith, fear, curiosity, and compassion. The Renaissance and early modern period ushered in a dramatic transformation in the history of medicine, shifting it from a field largely grounded in ancient texts and speculation to one increasingly based on empirical observation, experimentation, and scientific inquiry. This era, spanning roughly from the 14th to the 17th centuries, witnessed the rebirth of classical knowledge, the rise of humanism, and a growing emphasis on direct observation of the natural world. These changes profoundly impacted the understanding of the human body, disease, and the fundamental workings of life itself. One of the most significant figures of this medical revolution was Andreas Vesalius, a Flemish anatomist born in 1514. Educated in Paris and later appointed as professor of anatomy at the University of Padua, Vesalius is best known for his groundbreaking work, De Humani Corporis Fabrica, on the fabric of the human body, published in 1543. This richly illustrated text marked a turning point in anatomical science. Unlike his predecessors, Vesalius insisted on conducting dissections himself rather than relying on assistants or ancient texts. He challenged the anatomical teachings of Galen, whose works had dominated medical thinking for over a millennium, but were based largely on animal dissection rather than human observation. Vesalius meticulously described the human body in extraordinary detail, correcting numerous errors in Galen's anatomy. He discovered, for example, that the human sternum had 3 parts, not 7 as Galen had claimed, and that the human jaw was composed of a single bone, not 2. These corrections, based on first-hand dissection of human cadavers, represented a radical departure from blind reverence for authority and signaled a new, empirical approach to science. Vesalius' work was not only scientifically revolutionary, but also artistically significant. The illustrations in De Fabrica, created by artists from the workshop of Titian, combined scientific precision with artistic beauty, helping to communicate complex anatomical concepts with unprecedented clarity. Public dissections became a key element of anatomical education during this period, especially in Italy. Anatomical theaters were constructed in cities like Padua and Bologna, where students, scholars, and even members of the public could observe dissections. These theaters were often elaborate, amphitheater-style structures, emphasizing the performative and educational aspects of anatomy. The most famous of these, the Teatro Anatomico in Padua, still stands today as a symbol of Renaissance medical innovation. These dissections were often conducted during carnival season, blending science, spectacle, and civic pride. They underscored the new belief that understanding the human body required direct engagement with it, not just reading about it in ancient texts. Another major breakthrough came in the early 17th century with William Harvey, an English physician born in 1578. Harvey revolutionized the understanding of the cardiovascular system with his discovery of the circulation of blood. Before Harvey, most physicians believed that blood was produced in the liver, consumed by the body, and replenished continually, a view inherited from Galen. Harvey, through a series of precise experiments and dissections, demonstrated that the heart functioned as a pump, propelling blood through a closed circuit of arteries and veins. In his seminal work, Exercitatio Anatomica de Motu Cordis et Sanguinis in Animalibus, an anatomical exercise on the motion of the heart and blood in animals, published in 1628, Harvey provided detailed evidence that blood circulates continuously throughout the body. He calculated the volume of blood the heart pumped and showed that the liver could not possibly produce that much blood daily, refuting centuries of accepted wisdom. Harvey's work was initially controversial, facing resistance from traditionalists, but it eventually transformed cardiovascular physiology and laid the groundwork for modern medicine. His method of using quantifiable, repeatable experiments to prove a physiological theory set new standards for scientific rigor. Parallel to these anatomical and physiological discoveries was the invention of the microscope, a development that would open an entirely new frontier in medical science. Although simple lenses had been used for magnification for centuries, it was in the late 16th and early 17th centuries that compound microscopes, using multiple lenses, were developed. Zacharias Janssen, a Dutch spectacle maker, is often credited with creating one of the first compound microscopes around 1590, though the details are still debated. The real transformation came with the work of Antony van Leeuwenhoek, a Dutch tradesman and self-taught scientist who lived in the 17th century. Using finely crafted single-lens microscopes of his own design, Van Leeuwenhoek achieved magnifications far superior to his contemporaries. He became the first person to observe and describe a range of microscopic organisms, including bacteria, protozoa, sperm cells, and red blood cells. He referred to these organisms as animalcules and communicated his findings through detailed letters to the Royal Society in London. Although Van Leeuwenhoek was not a professional physician, his discoveries laid the foundation for microbiology and hinted at a microscopic world that would eventually help explain the causes of disease. The Renaissance also brought with it a transformation in medical education and the broader intellectual culture. Humanism, the movement emphasizing the study of classical texts and human-centered subjects, led scholars to re-examine ancient medical writings with fresh eyes. Rather than passively accepting ancient authorities, Renaissance physicians sought to test, verify, and sometimes correct them. This critical approach was bolstered by the advent of the printing press in the mid-15th century, which allowed for the rapid dissemination of medical texts. Works by Vesalius, Galen, and Hippocrates were printed and reprinted, often with commentary, illustrations, and annotations, reaching a far broader audience than ever before. This period also saw the emergence of new medical institutions and professional networks. Universities such as those in Padua, Leiden, and Paris became leading centers for medical training, attracting students from across Europe. Medical faculties began to emphasize not only theoretical knowledge, but also practical experience, often including bedside teaching and the use of anatomical models. Physicians started to publish case studies and medical observations, laying the groundwork for the later development of clinical medicine. Interestingly, Renaissance medicine still straddled two worlds, the mystical and the empirical. Alchemy, astrology, and the theory of humors remained influential, even as dissection and experimentation gained ground. Paracelsus, a Swiss physician and alchemist born in 1493, exemplified this duality. He rejected the traditional reliance on Galenic theory and instead promoted the use of chemicals and minerals in medicine. Paracelsus argued that disease was caused not by imbalances of humors, but by external agents that could be countered with specific remedies. His ideas were controversial but prescient, anticipating the rise of pharmacology and toxicology. Hospitals during this time began to change as well. Initially, religious institutions focused on charity and spiritual care. They gradually evolved into centers for medical treatment and education. The roles of surgeons, apothecaries, and physicians became more distinct, and medical practice began to be regulated more strictly. Licensing systems were introduced in many regions, aimed at curbing the activities of quacks and untrained healers. Despite these advancements, many challenges remained. Epidemics such as smallpox, syphilis, and the plague continued to wreak havoc, and treatments were often limited or ineffective. Hygiene and sanitation were poorly understood, and surgical procedures were still dangerous due to the lack of anesthesia and antisepsis. Yet the intellectual foundations for modern medicine had clearly been laid. The combination of anatomical precision, physiological experimentation, and the exploration of the microscopic world created a new framework for understanding health and disease. The Renaissance and early modern period were thus times of both continuity and change. While traditional ideas still held sway in many quarters, an emerging scientific spirit began to challenge and replace them. The rediscovery of the human body through dissection, the revelation of circulation, and the invisible world uncovered by the microscope all converged to deepen humanity's knowledge of itself. These centuries did not provide all the answers, but they decisively altered the questions, setting medicine on a course that would lead to the explosive discoveries of the Enlightenment and beyond. The 19th century marked a profound transformation in the history of medicine, representing the definitive rise of scientific medicine. It was during this period that many of the long-held theories and practices of earlier centuries were systematically dismantled and replaced by a more rigorous, evidence-based approach grounded in biology, chemistry, and physiology. This revolution did not occur in a vacuum. It was driven by groundbreaking discoveries, shifting societal attitudes, technological innovations, and an increasing belief in the power of science to improve human life. Perhaps the most significant shift was the emergence of an understanding of disease causation through the germ theory, which fundamentally altered how physicians and scientists viewed illness and the body. One of the early and pivotal breakthroughs in the fight against infection was the recognition of the importance of cleanliness in medical practice. Ignaz Semmelweis, a Hungarian physician working in Vienna in the 1840s, observed that maternal mortality rates from puerperal fever were dramatically higher in hospital wards where doctors performed deliveries after conducting autopsies, compared to wards staffed by midwives. He hypothesized that doctors were transferring cadaverous particles to their patients and implemented a policy requiring hand-washing with chlorinated lime solutions before attending to childbirth. The results were astonishing. Mortality rates plummeted. Yet, despite his compelling evidence, Semmelweis's findings were met with hostility and ridicule by much of the medical establishment, who clung to outdated miasmatic theories of disease. Semmelweis died in obscurity, but his insistence on antiseptic techniques paved the way for later advancements. One such advancement came through the work of Joseph Lister, a British surgeon who in the 1860s began applying Louis Pasteur's principles of microbiology to surgical practice. Lister introduced the use of carbolic acid, phenol, to sterilize surgical instruments, clean wounds, and even mist the air in operating rooms. His techniques dramatically reduced post-operative infections and mortality, leading to the broader adoption of antiseptic and later aseptic practices in surgery. Lister's work signaled the birth of modern surgical hygiene and established the importance of maintaining sterile environments, which remains a cornerstone of all medical procedures today. Underlying the success of these antiseptic methods was a growing understanding of the biological agents responsible for disease. This conceptual breakthrough, the germ theory of disease, was solidified through the pioneering work of Louis Pasteur and Robert Koch. Pasteur, a French chemist and microbiologist, initially studied fermentation in wine and beer and discovered that microorganisms were responsible for spoilage. He then extended this insight to human disease, showing that specific microbes could cause illness. One of his most famous experiments involved inoculating sheep with a weakened form of the anthrax bacterium, successfully immunizing them and demonstrating that microbes could not only cause disease, but could also be controlled and prevented through vaccination. Pasteur's work on rabies culminated in the creation of the first successful rabies vaccine in 1885, which he administered to a young boy named Joseph Meister who had been bitten by a rabid dog. The boy survived, and Pasteur's reputation as a medical hero was cemented. His discoveries laid the groundwork for immunology and revolutionized public health, influencing everything from sterilization procedures to food safety. In Germany, Robert Koch took these insights further by isolating the specific bacteria responsible for deadly diseases such as tuberculosis, anthrax, and cholera. Koch developed a systematic method for linking a particular microorganism to a disease, known as Koch's postulates. These criteria provided a rigorous framework for proving causality in infectious diseases and helped transform bacteriology into a precise science. Koch's identification of the tuberculosis bacillus in 1882 was a landmark achievement, especially considering the devastating impact of the disease, known as the White Plague, on 19th-century populations. His discovery not only advanced science, but also mobilized governments and health agencies to take more aggressive steps in disease prevention and public sanitation. The germ theory and the advent of microbiology had far-reaching implications for public health. By understanding how diseases spread, cities and governments began to implement infrastructure projects aimed at improving sanitation and reducing transmission. Clean water supplies, sewage systems, and waste removal services became priorities in urban planning. In the United Kingdom, the Public Health Act of 1848 laid the foundation for modern public health systems by establishing local health boards and mandating sanitary improvements. Similar initiatives followed in other countries, driven by both humanitarian concern and the desire to maintain a productive, healthy workforce in rapidly industrializing societies. Vaccination, which had begun in the late 18th century with Edward Jenner's work on smallpox, also expanded during the 19th century. Pasteur's innovations inspired further vaccine development, and by the end of the century, vaccines for diseases like typhoid and cholera were being introduced. This era marked the beginning of preventive medicine as a serious scientific endeavor, and vaccination campaigns gradually began to reduce the burden of once deadly diseases. Parallel to these advancements in microbiology and public health was the emergence of psychiatry and neurology as distinct fields of medicine. Throughout much of history, mental illness had been poorly understood, often attributed to demonic possession or moral failing. The 19th century saw a shift toward medicalizing mental health, with asylum care expanding and more humane treatments replacing the often brutal methods of the past. Pioneers such as Philippe Pinel in France and Dorothea Dix in the United States advocated for more compassionate care of the mentally ill. Psychiatry began to take shape as a medical discipline, with physicians attempting to classify mental disorders and develop theories of etiology based on brain function and hereditary factors. Meanwhile, advances in neurology were transforming the understanding of the nervous system. Paul Broca's discovery of a region in the brain associated with speech production, now known as Broca's area, demonstrated that specific cognitive functions could be localized to particular brain regions. The study of brain injuries and neurological diseases contributed to the growing realization that the brain, rather than the soul or spirit, was central to thought, emotion, and behavior. This insight would later influence the development of psychology, neuropsychiatry, and neuroscience. The 19th century also witnessed the transformation of hospitals from places of last resort for the poor and dying into centers of scientific medical care. Historically, hospitals had often been run by religious organizations and staffed by volunteers or poorly trained personnel. However, with the rise of scientific medicine, hospitals began to integrate research, education, and patient care. The growth of teaching hospitals associated with universities allowed for hands-on training of medical students and closer collaboration between theory and practice. Florence Nightingale played a key role in this transformation through her work in nursing and hospital reform. During the Crimean War, she dramatically reduced mortality rates by improving sanitation and organizing more effective nursing care. After the war, she established the first professional nursing school and wrote extensively on hospital design, hygiene, and patient care. Nightingale's statistical analyses, presented in innovative visual formats like the polar area diagram, demonstrated the impact of cleanliness and organization on patient outcomes. Her work not only elevated nursing as a profession, but also emphasized the importance of data and evidence in healthcare. Technological innovations further propelled medicine forward. The invention of the stethoscope by René Laennec in the early 19th century improved the ability of physicians to diagnose internal conditions, while advances in chemistry led to the development of anesthetics like ether and chloroform, revolutionizing surgery by making it painless and more precise. The discovery of X-rays by Wilhelm Röntgen in 1895 opened an entirely new window into the human body, allowing for non-invasive internal diagnosis. These tools brought greater accuracy and efficiency to clinical practice and underscored the increasing reliance on scientific instrumentation in medicine. Medical education also underwent significant reform during this century. In Europe and North America, standardized curricula, laboratory training, and clinical rotations became more common, replacing the apprenticeship models that had previously dominated. Licensing bodies and professional associations emerged to regulate practice and ensure a minimum level of competence among physicians. This professionalization helped to elevate the status of medicine as both a science and a service to society. By the end of the 19th century, medicine had undergone a dramatic transformation. What had once been a field steeped in tradition, speculation, and limited understanding had become a dynamic, evidence-based science with powerful tools to diagnose, treat, and prevent disease. The convergence of microbiology, surgery, public health, neurology, and hospital reform created a new paradigm in which disease was increasingly understood at the cellular and microbial level, and effective interventions could be developed accordingly. These advances not only improved survival and quality of life, but also laid the foundation for the even more rapid and revolutionary progress of the 20th century. The 20th century brought an unprecedented transformation in medicine, as scientific breakthroughs, technological innovations, and global events combined to propel healthcare into the modern era. This was a time of revolutionary change, where centuries-old diseases were finally subdued, diagnostic precision reached new heights, and human survival rates soared. Central to these changes were discoveries like antibiotics, the refinement of surgical techniques, the development of vaccines, and a broader understanding of mental health. Alongside these peacetime advancements, the two world wars acted as crucibles of innovation, forcing medicine to evolve rapidly in response to massive human suffering. One of the most significant breakthroughs of the 20th century was the discovery of antibiotics, particularly penicillin. Although Alexander Fleming discovered penicillin in 1928, it wasn't until the early 1940s that it was mass-produced and applied effectively in medicine. Fleming noticed that a mold, Penicillium notatum, inhibited the growth of bacteria on a petri dish. While he published his findings, it took over a decade before Howard Florey, Ernst Borischain, and their colleagues in Oxford realized its potential, purifying and developing it into a usable drug. The impact of penicillin was immediate and profound. Infections that once led to death, such as pneumonia, syphilis, and gangrene, could now be treated effectively. By World War II, penicillin was saving countless lives on the battlefield and at home. It became the foundation of a new era in medicine, ushering in a golden age of antibiotics that would later include streptomycin, tetracycline, and many others. The success of antibiotics spurred further public health initiatives, particularly mass immunization programs. Building on the 19th century groundwork laid by Jenner and Pasteur, the 20th century saw vaccines become an integral part of global health policy. Diseases that had long plagued humanity, such as polio, measles, diphtheria, and whooping cough, became preventable. Jonas Salk's development of the polio vaccine in the 1950s was especially celebrated. His decision not to patent it, prioritizing global access over profit, was widely praised. Later, Albert Sabin developed the oral polio vaccine, further simplifying mass distribution. These vaccination programs not only saved millions of lives, but also contributed to the concept of herd immunity, reducing outbreaks and nearly eradicating several deadly diseases. Smallpox, one of the deadliest diseases in history, was declared eradicated in 1980, following a successful global vaccination campaign led by the World Health Organization, a triumph of modern public health cooperation. As infectious diseases began to recede in the developed world, attention increasingly turned to surgical innovation. Throughout the century, surgical procedures grew safer and more sophisticated. The introduction of general anesthesia, antisepsis, and antibiotics allowed for longer and more complex surgeries. Open-heart surgery became feasible in the 1950s, and by the 1960s, organ transplantation had entered the realm of reality. In 1967, South African surgeon Christiaan Barnard performed the first successful human heart transplant, an operation that stunned the world and demonstrated the heights medical science had reached. Kidney, liver, lung, and pancreas transplants soon followed, each one representing not just technical ability, but a deeper understanding of immunology, as doctors learned to prevent organ rejection with immunosuppressive drugs like cyclosporin. Parallel to surgical advancements were monumental leaps in medical diagnostics. Tools that allowed physicians to peer inside the living body transformed the practice of medicine. X-rays, discovered in 1895 by Wilhelm Röntgen, had already revolutionized diagnosis by the early 20th century, but their evolution continued. In the 1940s and 50s, ultrasound technology, initially developed for naval sonar, was adapted to visualize internal organs and monitor pregnancies, becoming a staple of obstetric care. The invention of computed tomography, CT, in the 1970s and magnetic resonance imaging, MRI, in the 1980s allowed for incredibly detailed views of soft tissues and the brain, offering new pathways for diagnosis without invasive procedures. These non-invasive imaging techniques not only improved accuracy, but also enabled earlier detection of conditions such as tumors, aneurysms, and degenerative diseases. MRI in particular allowed neurologists to observe brain function and structure in living patients, sparking new understanding of neurological disorders. Mental health care also underwent significant changes during the 20th century. The century began with large asylums and institutional care, often characterized by poor living conditions and limited treatment options. Sigmund Freud's psychoanalytic theories emerged in the early 1900s, proposing that unconscious conflicts influence behavior and mental illness. Freud's methods, including talk therapy and dream analysis, laid the groundwork for modern psychotherapy. Although controversial, his ideas influenced not only psychiatry but also literature, art, and popular culture. Later in the century, other approaches emerged, including cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, which became widely adopted for treating conditions like depression and anxiety. Biological psychiatry also gained momentum, driven by discoveries in neuroscience and pharmacology. The introduction of psychotropic medications fundamentally changed the treatment of mental illness. Chlorpromazine, the first antipsychotic, was introduced in the 1950s and helped manage schizophrenia symptoms, allowing many patients to leave institutions. Antidepressants like imipramine and later selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, SSRIs, such as Prozac provided relief for millions. With medication and therapy, many mental illnesses that once led to lifelong institutionalization became manageable, leading to the deinstitutionalization movement of the 1960s and 70s. This shift, while positive in terms of human rights, also left gaps in care, particularly for those without access to consistent outpatient services, leading to increased rates of homelessness among people with untreated mental illness in some regions. The role of medicine during wartime, particularly World War I and II, was another catalyst for rapid innovation. The horrors of trench warfare, chemical weapons, and mass casualties during World War I forced doctors to develop new methods for treating trauma. Blood transfusion techniques improved, and mobile field hospitals began to appear. Reconstructive surgery, particularly for facial injuries, was advanced significantly by Harold Gillies, a New Zealand-born surgeon who became known as the father of modern plastic surgery. His pioneering work with skin grafts and facial reconstruction laid the foundation for both cosmetic and restorative procedures. During World War II, medicine advanced at an even faster pace. Penicillin was mass-produced for the first time, saving countless lives from infected wounds. The war effort also accelerated the development of antibiotics like streptomycin, effective against tuberculosis. Triage systems were refined to handle battlefield injuries more efficiently, and rapid evacuation of the wounded became standard practice. Medical corps and military doctors developed techniques for managing shock, burns, and trauma, much of which would later be adopted in civilian emergency medicine. Innovations in psychiatry also emerged, as doctors struggled to treat shell shock, now recognized as post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, changing the understanding of how psychological trauma affects the brain. Medical research itself changed fundamentally in the 20th century, becoming more formalized and institutional. Government and private funding supported large-scale clinical trials, and new ethical standards emerged in response to abuses such as the Tuskegee syphilis study. The Nuremberg Code and the Declaration of Helsinki laid the foundations for modern bioethics, emphasizing informed consent and the rights of research participants. Hospitals evolved into high-tech institutions, equipped not only for treatment but also for cutting-edge research. Universities partnered with hospitals to train doctors and investigate new therapies, contributing to a global ecosystem of knowledge sharing. By the end of the 20th century, life expectancy had increased dramatically in most parts of the world. Diseases that once decimated populations were under control, and access to care had expanded. However, new challenges emerged. The rise of antibiotic resistance, fueled by overuse and misuse, began to threaten the effectiveness of once reliable treatments. The HIV/AIDS crisis, first identified in the early 1980s, exposed the limitations of existing healthcare systems and ignited a global public health response. It also spurred rapid advancements in virology and antiviral drugs, and brought attention to the need for global cooperation in facing pandemics, a theme that would echo into the 21st century. The 20th century saw medicine evolve from a somewhat fragmented and empirical field into a sophisticated, interconnected science capable of altering the course of life itself. With the combined force of biology, technology, psychology, and global collaboration, human beings began to live longer, healthier lives. What had once been fatal became manageable, and what had been speculative became measurable. But with this progress came new responsibilities, including ethical considerations, equitable access, and the preservation of effectiveness in the face of new threats. The legacy of 20th century medicine is not just in the lives it saved, but in the foundation it laid for a future still being written. The 21st century has seen medicine cross into a new frontier, one shaped not just by discoveries in biology, but by the rapid advancement of technology, computation, and the global interconnectivity of information. Medicine today no longer exists in isolation within hospitals or laboratories. It is increasingly digital, data-driven, and deeply personal. From decoding the human genome to developing personalized therapies and employing artificial intelligence in diagnostics, the field is undergoing a profound transformation. This evolution has opened unprecedented opportunities to prevent, treat, and even cure diseases that once seemed intractable. However, it has also raised new and complex ethical questions that humanity is still learning how to answer. The mapping of the human genome in 2003 marked a pivotal moment in medical history. For the first time, scientists had a complete blueprint of human DNA, a monumental achievement of the Human Genome Project that took more than a decade and involved researchers from across the globe. This breakthrough unlocked new possibilities in understanding genetic diseases, predicting health risks, and even tailoring treatments to individual genetic profiles. Gene therapy, once considered speculative science fiction, has become a growing reality. In gene therapy, defective genes can be replaced, repaired, or silenced, offering hope for conditions like spinal muscular atrophy, certain forms of inherited blindness, and severe combined immunodeficiency, SCID. A landmark moment came when a young girl with leukemia was treated using gene-edited immune cells modified with CRISPR technology, a tool that allows for precise edits to DNA. The success of CRISPR has opened the door to possibilities that range from curing genetic disorders to engineering disease-resistant crops, though it has also sparked global debates about the ethical boundaries of genetic manipulation. As biology and genetics advanced, so too did computational power. Artificial intelligence began playing an increasingly significant role in medicine, particularly in diagnostics and imaging. AI algorithms can now analyze medical images like X-rays, MRIs, and CT scans with accuracy rivaling or even surpassing that of trained radiologists. Machine learning systems trained on vast datasets can detect early signs of conditions like breast cancer, diabetic retinopathy, and even rare genetic disorders from a single image or sound file. In one notable case, AI developed by Google Health was able to detect breast cancer in mammograms more accurately than experienced radiologists, reducing both false positives and false negatives. These tools offer the potential not only to improve diagnostic accuracy, but also to bring high-quality diagnostics to underserved or remote regions where specialists are scarce. Yet AI also presents challenges, including concerns about transparency, how decisions are made by black box algorithms, and accountability when errors occur. The rise of digital health tools has also transformed the patient experience. Telemedicine, once a niche service, became mainstream in the early 2020s, especially during the COVID-19 pandemic. With lockdowns in place and hospitals overwhelmed, remote consultations using video calls, health apps, and wearable devices became essential for maintaining healthcare access. For many patients, this shift made care more convenient and immediate, particularly for chronic condition management and mental health services. Wearable devices like smartwatches now monitor heart rate, sleep patterns, oxygen saturation, and even detect arrhythmias like atrial fibrillation in real time. The Apple Watch and similar devices have notified users of irregular heart rhythms, prompting timely medical intervention and saving lives in the process. This integration of continuous monitoring into daily life is a cornerstone of digital health, empowering patients to take greater control of their well-being. The era of personalized medicine is another defining feature of 21st century healthcare. Rather than applying a one-size-fits-all approach to treatment, personalized medicine uses information about a person's genes, environment, and lifestyle to design the most effective interventions. This approach has been especially transformative in oncology, where genetic profiling of tumors allows for targeted therapies that specifically attack cancer cells with fewer side effects. Drugs like trastuzumab, Herceptin, are designed for breast cancers that express a specific genetic marker, HER2, leading to significantly better outcomes. Pharmacogenomics, the study of how genes affect a person's response to drugs, is also gaining traction, helping physicians determine which medications will be most effective and least likely to cause adverse effects based on an individual's genetic makeup. In effect, medicine is moving away from general averages and closer to individualized predictions and treatments. However, no discussion of 21st century medicine can ignore the profound global impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. First detected in late 2019, the novel coronavirus SARS-CoV-2 quickly evolved into a worldwide crisis, infecting hundreds of millions and causing millions of deaths. The speed and scale of the pandemic challenged healthcare systems, exposed global inequalities, and accelerated innovation out of necessity. Perhaps the most remarkable achievement during this time was the rapid development and deployment of COVID-19 vaccines. Using mRNA technology, companies like Pfizer-BioNTech and Moderna were able to produce effective vaccines within a year of the virus's discovery, an astonishing feat considering traditional vaccine development often takes a decade or more. mRNA vaccines work by delivering genetic instructions that prompt the body to produce a harmless version of the virus's spike protein, training the immune system to recognize and fight the real virus. The success of these vaccines has not only helped control the pandemic, but also demonstrated the potential of mRNA technology for future vaccines against diseases like HIV, malaria, and even cancer. The pandemic also highlighted the importance of global cooperation in health, as well as the dangers of misinformation and unequal access to medical resources. While high-income countries were able to roll out mass vaccination programs quickly, many low-income regions faced shortages, delays, and logistical challenges. This disparity raised difficult questions about vaccine equity, patent rights, and the responsibilities of wealthy nations in a global health emergency. It also underscored the role of digital communication in health education, and the perils when misinformation spreads more quickly than science. As medicine continues to evolve, it faces not only scientific and technological challenges, but also profound ethical dilemmas. Cloning, once the subject of science fiction, is now a real capability in the laboratory. While reproductive human cloning is banned in most countries, therapeutic cloning, which involves creating embryos to harvest stem cells, remains a controversial yet promising avenue for regenerative medicine. These stem cells can potentially be used to repair damaged tissues, treat neurological diseases like Parkinson's, or even grow new organs. However, the ethical implications of creating and destroying human embryos for research remain deeply contentious, with religious, philosophical, and cultural beliefs shaping the debate. Artificial intelligence, too, poses unique ethical challenges. As algorithms make more decisions in healthcare, from diagnosing conditions to recommending treatments, questions arise about privacy, consent, and bias. Who is responsible if an AI system makes a mistake? How do we ensure that AI tools do not reflect or reinforce existing inequalities in healthcare access or treatment outcomes? The data used to train AI is often drawn from specific populations, raising concerns that these tools may perform poorly on underrepresented groups. Ensuring fairness and transparency in AI is not just a technical issue, but a moral imperative. Meanwhile, the vast troves of health data collected by digital devices, apps, and electronic health records raise urgent concerns about privacy. In a world where tech companies can collect and analyze sensitive health information, patients are left wondering who owns their data, how it is used, and whether it is truly secure. Cybersecurity threats, data breaches, and commercial exploitation of health data are growing risks in a digitally connected world. Policymakers and institutions are increasingly tasked with balancing innovation with the protection of individual rights. Despite these challenges, the 21st century has made clear that the potential of medicine is greater than ever before. Regenerative medicine is making strides with lab-grown organs and 3D printed tissues. Advances in neuroscience are opening up new possibilities for brain-computer interfaces, potentially restoring mobility to paralyzed individuals. Cancer treatments are becoming more precise. HIV is now manageable as a chronic condition, and diseases like hepatitis C are being cured. The integration of technology, data, and human biology is creating a medical ecosystem that is more proactive, predictive, and patient-centered. As humanity moves deeper into the century, the central question will not only be how far medicine can go, but how wisely it can use the tools it has developed. The promise of extending life and enhancing its quality must be tempered by a commitment to equity, ethics, and empathy. Whether it's editing a gene, consulting an AI doctor, or receiving a vaccine developed in record time, the medicine of the 21st century continues to blur the boundaries between science fiction and reality, offering unprecedented hope while demanding careful stewardship of its immense power. The future of medicine is poised to transcend the boundaries of Earth, time, and biology itself. With the convergence of neuroscience, biotechnology, and artificial intelligence, humanity is entering an era where the treatment of disease may no longer be limited to drugs or surgery, but may involve rewriting the body's code, replacing failing organs with synthetic ones, and even interfacing directly with the brain. Medicine is no longer only about curing illness. It is rapidly becoming about enhancing human performance, extending lifespan, and preparing the body to survive in environments far beyond the terrestrial. The implications of these emerging fields are profound, offering extraordinary possibilities while raising equally significant philosophical and ethical questions. Among the most intriguing advances in modern science is the development of brain-computer interfaces, or BCIs. These technologies aim to create direct communication pathways between the human brain and external devices. While early work in this area focused on helping paralyzed patients regain movement or communication using neural signals, the applications are rapidly expanding. Companies like Neuralink, founded by Elon Musk, have begun experimenting with implantable BCIs that can record and stimulate brain activity with incredible precision. In one breakthrough experiment, a paralyzed man was able to control a robotic arm using only his thoughts. In another, researchers enabled a person who had lost the ability to speak to produce words on a screen using a brain implant that decoded speech signals. These innovations opened the door to restoring lost functions after stroke, spinal cord injury, or degenerative diseases like ALS. In the longer term, proponents believe BCIs could augment memory, allow for thought-to-thought communication, or even merge human consciousness with artificial intelligence, though such ideas remain highly speculative and controversial. Simultaneously, bionics and advanced prosthetics are transforming how physical disability is addressed. Modern prosthetic limbs can now respond to muscle signals, allowing for lifelike motion and control. Some bionic hands even provide sensory feedback, enabling users to feel textures or pressure. In one fascinating case, a man who lost his arm in an accident was fitted with a prosthetic that not only responded to his thoughts, but transmitted sensory data back to his brain, allowing him to distinguish between rough and smooth surfaces. These developments are giving rise to the idea of cyborg medicine, where biological and synthetic components seamlessly integrate. Exoskeletons, once the stuff of science fiction, are already being used to help people with paralysis stand and walk again. Soldiers, factory workers, and first responders may one day wear exosuits to enhance strength and endurance, blurring the line between healing and enhancement. Another area generating excitement and ethical debate is anti-aging research. Scientists have long known that the biological processes underlying aging can be influenced by genetics, environment, and cellular mechanisms such as telomere shortening, oxidative stress, and epigenetic changes. In recent years, a number of researchers have made progress in understanding and potentially reversing some of these mechanisms. Studies in mice have shown that reprogramming cells using specific genes can rejuvenate tissues and extend lifespan. One notable discovery involved the use of Yamanaka factors, a set of transcription factors that can reprogram adult cells to behave like young, pluripotent stem cells. In another groundbreaking experiment, researchers were able to reverse signs of aging in mouse brains, muscles, and eyes. Meanwhile, drugs like rapamycin and metformin, originally developed for other purposes, are being studied for their potential anti-aging effects in humans. Some scientists believe aging may eventually be classified not just as a natural process, but as a treatable condition, though this concept remains hotly debated. The drive to extend not just lifespan, but health span, the years of life lived in good health, is also closely tied to regenerative medicine and synthetic biology. These fields are unlocking the ability to grow human tissues and even entire organs in the lab. Using a patient's own cells, researchers can now cultivate heart valves, skin grafts, and tracheas that are less likely to be rejected by the immune system. In one landmark case, scientists successfully grew a miniature, functional human liver in a lab dish. Bioprinting, a process that uses 3D printing technology to assemble cells layer by layer, is making it possible to produce complex structures like blood vessels, cartilage, and even rudimentary kidneys. While fully functional lab-grown organs suitable for transplantation are still a work in progress, the day when they become a clinical reality appears increasingly near. This would revolutionize transplantation medicine, eliminating the wait for donor organs and the risks of immune rejection. Synthetic biology goes even further, aiming not only to rebuild what has been lost, but to design entirely new biological systems. This includes engineering bacteria to produce drugs, modifying viruses to deliver genetic therapies, and creating cells that perform novel functions. One exciting application is the development of living drugs, such as CAR T cells that are genetically modified to seek out and destroy cancer cells with remarkable precision. In other projects, synthetic biology is being used to create biosensors, cells that can detect disease markers and trigger therapeutic responses automatically. The potential of this field is staggering, though it comes with challenges around containment, unintended consequences, and biosecurity. As medicine looks to extend and enhance life on Earth, it is also preparing to care for life beyond it. Space medicine is an emerging discipline focused on understanding how the human body responds to the unique stresses of space travel. In microgravity, astronauts experience muscle atrophy, bone density loss, fluid shifts, and changes in immune function. Prolonged exposure to cosmic radiation also increases the risk of cancer and neurodegeneration. NASA and other space agencies are studying these effects with an eye toward long-duration missions to the Moon, Mars, and beyond. In one fascinating study, astronaut Scott Kelly spent nearly a year aboard the International Space Station, while his identical twin remained on Earth as a control subject. The twin study revealed changes in gene expression immune response, and even the length of telomeres, chromosomal end caps associated with aging. Although many of these changes reversed upon return to Earth, the findings highlighted the complex physiological toll of spaceflight. Space medicine must also consider how to perform surgery or manage emergencies in zero gravity, where even a drop of blood can float away and contaminate the cabin. Looking further ahead, the challenges of human reproduction and development in space, the design of extraterrestrial medical facilities, and the psychological demands of isolation and confinement will require entirely new frameworks of medical science. Technologies like 3D printed medications, AI-powered diagnostics, and compact surgical robots may become standard tools for healthcare on Mars or deep space missions. The isolation of space also makes telemedicine and remote autonomous care critical, echoing trends already seen on Earth in rural and underserved areas. The convergence of these developments points to a future where medicine is not only curative and preventative, but also predictive, personalized, and pervasive. The integration of big data, wearable sensors, genomics, and environmental inputs can enable a continuous loop of monitoring and intervention tailored to each individual. Imagine a system where your watch detects subtle changes in your gait, predicts the early onset of Parkinson's disease, and automatically schedules a virtual appointment. Or where a chip embedded under your skin monitors blood glucose and releases insulin as needed without your awareness. These are not dreams of the distant future. They are technologies being developed today. Yet for all its promise, the future of medicine also demands vigilance. Ethical questions will intensify as interventions move from healing to enhancement. Will cognitive or physical upgrades be available to everyone, or only the wealthy? Could gene editing lead to a new form of inequality, or even designer babies? Who decides what enhancements are acceptable or safe? These are questions that science alone cannot answer. They will require input from ethicists, policymakers, and society at large. Moreover, as health becomes increasingly data-driven, the protection of privacy and autonomy becomes paramount. Medical decisions guided by algorithms must be transparent and accountable. The excitement over innovation must be balanced by a respect for human dignity, equity, and compassion. The medicine of tomorrow is no longer just about survival. It is about redefining what it means to be human. From repairing spinal cords to growing organs, from uploading thoughts to computers to treating aging as a disease, humanity stands on the brink of a medical renaissance. Whether that future becomes one of shared progress or deep division depends not just on what we can do, but on how wisely we choose to do it. The history of medicine is a story of humanity's enduring quest to understand and heal the body. From prehistoric trepanation to 21st century gene therapy, each era brought key milestones that reshaped our knowledge and capabilities. The Hippocratic Oath formalized medical ethics in ancient Greece, while Islamic scholars like Avicenna preserved and expanded medical wisdom during the Middle Ages. The Renaissance unlocked anatomical science through dissection, and the 19th century brought the germ theory and antiseptic techniques that transformed surgery and hygiene. In the 20th century, antibiotics, vaccines, imaging tools, and organ transplants drastically increased life expectancy, which rose from around 40 years in 1900 to over 70 by 2000. Modern medicine now tackles not just disease, but aging and enhancement. Studying this journey is essential not only for honoring past breakthroughs, but for guiding ethical innovation. For instance, the mistakes made in early experimentation, such as unregulated human trials, remind us of the importance of consent and oversight. The progress in medicine has always been built on the foundations of what came before, each cure, discovery, and invention layered upon centuries of trial, error, and insight.